2024 is coming to an end for PlayStation, and I would say it was a pretty solid year overall. It wasn't the best year in PlayStation's history, not even close, but it definitely wasn't the worst either. In terms of negatives, we all know the state of plays this year weren't anything crazy. There were some standout games like Ghost of Yotei. They also announced Naughty Dog's new game, Intergalactic, at the Game Awards, but we didn't get a showcase. PlayStation Stars went down. They are changing the whole system with PlayStation Stars to make the points expire, and the PS5 Pro is $700. But when you cut through the noise, as far as games go, this year was really good if you were a PlayStation gamer, starting out with the biggest game of the year that got totally neglected at the Game Awards, Helldivers 2. I mean, I sunk so many hours into that game, and it's one of the best second party, well, like it's second party, but PlayStation owns the IP, so it's like 1.5 party. It's one of the best PlayStation games I've ever played, and I've consistently loved jumping back in with each and every update. We got Stellar Blade, we got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I mean, we got Rise of the Ronin. The list goes on and on of great games coming out all throughout the year, and if you missed a lot of the big PS4 games like Horizon Zero Dawn or The Last of Us Part 2, well, Sony has remakes and remasters just sitting there, and they all had great upgrade paths that only cost $10. So yeah, if you look at Twitter, they're making it seem like PlayStation had the worst year they've ever had, but if you actually play games on your PlayStation console, I mean, I don't think there's that much to complain about. It's a light year in terms of first party, but they really brought the heat from the third party exclusives, and they also brought the heat from first and second party stuff as well. Not monumental game changing things, but great stuff to play, which is the whole reason you buy a console in the first place. But I want to look forward in today's video like I usually do at the end of the year. And when it comes to hardware, I mean, we're at the midpoint of the generation, right? Like, I fully don't expect them to release a PS5 Pro 2 or anything like that. They're not going to shock us with that brand new handheld. We know that that is being developed as a PS6 era device because they're making 2 SKUs of the chip similar to the Series X and S, but unlike Microsoft, Sony has a brain and they're using the lower spec chip to run a handheld and not a home console that's going to completely screw up the generation for their entire brand. But what Sony loves to do when they're in these mid-generation time periods is refresh accessories and bring out new ones. Where is the DualSense V2? It is yet to be announced. It leaked at the very beginning of this year. It was actually the first video I did after the Christmas break I took last year, which I think was like 2 weeks. The first thing I talked about in 2024 was the DualSense V2. It was supposedly going to have up to double the battery life. It was going to be a small refinement on the controller, giving people exactly what they wanted. It even had a Best Buy page, but it never materialized, and we still have not heard about it. And now at the end of the year, we still don't have it. So hopefully that is on the horizon. I thought it was going to ship with newer models of the PS5 Slim or the PS5 Pro at the very least, but I don't know, something's holding them up there. But when it comes to the DualSense Edge, there's an interesting situation that's been created by the existence of the DualSense V2, and that is the battery life of the Edge. If you don't know, if you haven't dropped the $200 on the DualSense Edge, the battery life is abysmal. It's basically a wired controller. I use it on my PC and my PS5 to keep the battery always charged, but you know, like, the battery life is far worse than the DualSense. And if they release a DualSense V2 alongside this new colorway option that we're supposedly getting of the Pulse Explorer, the Pulse Elite, and the DualSense Edge in black, if they release a black DualSense Edge with a better battery life, I'm just going to be real, I'm going to be not happy about that because I just bought my second DualSense Edge, which was the 30th anniversary one. So if they release that without a better battery life, and then they release just a couple of months later a black edition of the controller that has an improved battery life, knowing that the DualSense V2 leaked a year ago, they're in just such a weird spot, right? Like, do you release the V2 with better battery life and then not improve the battery life in the Edge? Or do you say, suck it to all the people who bought a DualSense Edge 30th anniversary edition and say maybe you're going to want to pick up a black version with better battery life? I don't know what the play there is. They should have figured that out and released the V2 with better battery life earlier this year and made sure those improvements made their way into the 30th anniversary controller and then subsequently later on the black edition of the controller. But it's not my job to solve that problem. It's just a problem that's been presented by this weird situation where a controller was announced through Best Buy and still has not materialized. I don't know what's happening there. As far as other hardware goes, I don't think we're going to see a handheld in this generation. I think that the rumors that the chip for it is going to be a 2 SKU thing where it's the PS6 chip and a downclock version of the PS6 chip to run this handheld hardware. I think that's exactly what's going to happen because they want this thing to be backwards compatible with PS4 and PS5 games. And the best way to do that is to use the same chip from the next generation console and just downclock it for an 800p screen. So in terms of hardware, I think all we could really hope for is refreshed accessories and hopefully some plates for the PS5 Pro, because I would love to deck out my PS5 Pro in black. But speaking of plates, I'd like to see more special edition plates for the Slim and the Pro come out. You know, they have a lot of games on the horizon like Intergalactic, like Ghost of Yotei. Let's get some special edition plates for those. I'd love to see the Spider-Man 2 plates be re-released for the Slim and the Pro, since those are really the only PS5s you can buy right now. They've got both of these consoles out in the wild. Anyone can go and buy them. So I think it's time to start producing more accessories for those consoles. I'd also like to see Sony kind of dip their toes into the premium monitor line. I know they have the InZone line that's kind of like made for PC and PlayStation 5, but that's a different team at Sony. I'd like to see the PlayStation team develop a monitor that uses an OLED panel that runs at 4K, 120 Hertz, that makes it the ultimate panel for your PS5. I understand that it would be costly, but if you've ever used a Sony monitor, you really understand that you get what you pay for when it comes to their monitor tech. So I'd kind of be interested in checking that out if they were to produce it. And I'd also like to see them just start from scratch on the Pulse Explorer. I am a gaming earbud addict and I've used all the different ones available, whether it's the Razer Hammerhead Hyperspeeds, whether it's the Pulse Explorer or the SteelSeries Game Buds. And the SteelSeries Game Buds are just absolutely incredible. They fit in your ears great. They sound amazing. The battery life is hours and hours and hours. They charge super quick and they come with a USB-C dongle. So there's virtually zero latency and you can connect to Bluetooth and Wi-Fi at the same time, which makes them great for things like the Steam Deck or connecting your phone to your headphones and your PS5 at the same time in case you like listening to music when you play Gran Turismo 7 like I do. But yeah, as far as hardware goes, I mean, I think we're in the back half of this generation. I think the hardware is figured out. We might see some internal revisions with the PS5 Slim and PS5 Pro where they can slim it down on the inside, not really change the chassis and make more money because they're paying less for parts and paying less for copper for the heatsink and things like that. But as far as the actual PS5 hardware goes, I think we're going to be living with this for at least 2 to 3 years at this point. And compared to the PS4 generation, it actually feels like this hardware is going to keep up. So I think they're in a really good spot with that going into 2025. And with hardware basically at the point where it's going to stay for the next couple of years, that gives them more opportunities to work on software. And the one thing that I think we all really still want is PS3 backwards compatibility. There were rumors throughout this year that Sony's actively working on that technology, and I can't think of a better time to release it than right now. You know, like all these big studios like Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, Santa Monica Studio, and everyone else, they're deep in the trenches working on their big first-party games, and everyone's kind of sick of remasters. But you know what no one ever gets sick of? Nostalgia. They never get sick of old games, and since no one really enjoys streaming PS3 games on their PlayStation 5, it's been a long time since I think a lot of us out there have played a lot of our favorite PS3 games like Metal Gear Solid 4, Gran Turismo 5, you know, Infamous 1 and 2, Festival of Blood, Resistance, Killzone. There are so many games, Motorstorm, there are so many games trapped in the PS3 generation where if they can figure out how to release PS3 games that natively run on the PlayStation 5 early into next year, I feel like that would be a great way to be a stopgap for this dearth of first-party games that we're experiencing right now that's probably going to last well into 2025. Like, I think Ghost of Yotei is definitely coming out in 2025, but that really just reeks of being a November type game. You know, like at the earliest, I think we could see it in September, but you know, that's the end of next year pretty much. So they need stuff to fill out the release calendar in between. And I know there's a ton of games coming out in the third-party realm in the first half of the year, but what we really want as PlayStation owners is first-party games because that's what got us into PlayStation in the first place. And I feel like the best way to kind of satiate people's needs for a little bit is to re-release a bunch of great PS3 games that look and run better on the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro. Also, we're kind of taking the steps into getting themes for the PlayStation 5. If you haven't seen these yet, the 30th anniversary brought brought with it some PlayStation branded themes so you can make your console look and sound like a PS1, PS2, PS3, or PS4. I love this. I think it's awesome. The biggest bummer there is that it's like limited time. They're saying that they're going to go away after an indiscriminate amount of time. I really think they should just keep this around, because for me, someone who grew up with every PlayStation from the PS1 all the way up to the PS5, the PSP and Vita included, I even had multiple generations of the PSP. I had the first one and the PSP Go. I love hearing the PS3 and PSP tick sound when I navigate through the PS5's user interface, and it's not like a licensing thing because Sony made the consoles. They own the operating systems. There's virtually no reason to make those themes go away, especially considering they're the only themes we've got. I mean, I know you can change the background on the Welcome Hub and the PS5 defaults to that when you turn it on, but you know, I had a month to experience that before I actually got real themes on my PlayStation 5, and now that I have these real PlayStation branded themes on my console, I never really want to go back. I mean, I'd love to see some game related themes like the awesome Last of Us 2 one I had on my PS4 and PS4 Pro in the last generation, but I gotta be real, once I picked up the PS2 theme for the PS4, I left that running on my console for years. Like from the day I got that till the day I turned that console off for the last time, that was the theme I was using, and ironically, that's the first theme I got on the PS5, but then I also got a sweet PS3 one as well. So I really think Sony, if they're not going to give us full customizable themes for the PlayStation 5, they really need to keep those 30th anniversary themes around because they're just excellent. I think that would be a great win going into 2025, and they should just do it because they own all the assets. There's literally no reason to take it away. Another thing I've been thinking about ever since I watched that 37-minute video that Mark Cerny put out to debunk all the Twitter weirdos who are obsessed with teraflops is that they should do that more to really explain how game hardware works. I've never been more interested in a console than hearing Mark Cerny just talk about the ins and outs of graphics technology and upscaling technology. And one area they really need to improve their communication on is with PSSR. I think obviously when you play it with games that Sony makes, like The Last of Us Part 2 or Gran Turismo 7 that implement it, or Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, I mean, the list goes on and on there. When you see developers who actually care enough to put in the time to make it work right, actually using it right, the results are amazing. Gran Turismo 7 looks incredible on the PS5 Pro, and getting the ray tracing that's only limited to replays and menus in the PS5 version of the game, it's an awesome upgrade that really goes a long way. And I know people love comparing Gran Turismo 7 and Forza Motorsport, but they're just people who don't play Forza Motorsport, because if they did, they'd realize that it's an unfinished, broken, buggy mess that needed multiple more years in the kitchen to develop that game. And it's embarrassing that Microsoft is selling it for $70 still, because I'm just going to be real, it's bad. So it was already not really a race between Forza Motorsport and Gran Turismo, but with that added edge on the PS5 Pro of being able to use the built-in ray tracing features that come along with it, I mean, that game is the clear winner in my opinion between two franchises that have been at odds with each other for decades. Hogwarts Legacy, I bring this up all the time. If you fell off Hogwarts Legacy like I did back when it came out, the thing that'll get you back into it is playing it with PSSR and the ray tracing turned on. It looks absolutely phenomenal. I'm not the biggest fan of ray tracing, but once you see it actually working in a game with consistent frame rate, you're like, okay, if we can get this more in the future, I'm not going to complain about it because it really does look that much better. So I think what PlayStation needs to do is communicate that more, like show us breakdowns of how it's working like Mark Cerny did, and then maybe the developers who aren't as experienced with PSSR or are too lazy to implement it correctly have a handy little cheat sheet that they can just look at and say, oh, this is how we should use this software instead of FSR, and then we won't get busted, broken, buggy patches like we did with Silent Hill 2, Star Wars Outlaws, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. I know people are criticizing Sony for the buggy patch state of those games, but like, they're not the controllers of Ubisoft. They're not the controllers of EA and Respawn. They can't say, hey, don't release the patch unless you actually put in the time to make it work right. And, you know, if you're a console manufacturer like Sony, you're not going to sit there and say, this company wants more people to buy their games, so they're just going to rush out a patch that sucks just to get some marketing buzz, to get a few more sales of their game, because you'd assume that these game makers would actually put the time and energy in to make their game look and run in the best light possible. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, and it's being reflected in game sales by both EA and Ubisoft. So maybe the key to making people buy your games is not spending tons of money on big IP like Star Wars or Avatar. It's actually just being original and cool and listening to your customers and putting in effort where it counts to make sure your games are optimized, run well, aren't full of bugs, and actually use great features like PSSR effectively. So if they're not going to do the work, let Mark Cerny get on camera and tell them exactly how to do it, because that's what that dude is built to do. It's so interesting listening to him talk. I also think at this point in time, they really need to start pumping the brakes on the PC releases. Spider-Man 2 is coming out in January, so is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, even though that's a third-party exclusive. I don't think they need to be the ones announcing this stuff. Like, throw the trailers up on the PlayStation YouTube channel, throw them up on IGN or whatever, but beyond that, you don't need to do full articles or anything like that, or put them in state of plays, because when you're having your community sitting there with the PS5 feeling like they're being neglected with true first-party games, and then they're seeing a bunch of remasters, a bunch of remakes, and a bunch of marketing around PC releases, that doesn't really present yourself in the best light to them. And I feel like they're justified in feeling that way, because I feel that way. And that's the biggest thing I really want from Sony going into 2025 and beyond, is just more communication. If you look at Xbox and Sony right now, they're basically two ends of the spectrum. Microsoft, they talk way too much. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. They're constantly switching their messaging. They're lying to their biggest fans and making them feel like they wasted their money on the Xbox Series X. Sony definitely should not go that far towards that end of the spectrum. But way on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Sony, who doesn't talk to us at all, which is crazy, because we're like an army of dedicated hardcore fans that are ready to go to bat for them and say, hey, people who don't have a PlayStation 5 yet, this is the console you should be buying right now, and here's X, Y, and Z reasons for it. Sony doesn't really have a roadmap out in public. We have no idea what they're working on outside of leaks and rumors and the two first-party games that are announced. So all they really need to do is just do more state of plays or do more blog posts. And speaking of fan support, I think the easiest way to rebuild that huge community of big PlayStation diehard fans that they had during the PS3 and 4 generation is, of course, to bring back PlayStation Experience. If you guys have never been to this, it was a convention that they held all over the country. They did like 2 or 3 of them, maybe even 4. And I went to the one in Anaheim, which I'm pretty sure is the first one, where The Last of Us 2 was announced. I watched that game be announced on a giant screen in front of the Anaheim Convention Center with like thousands of PlayStation's diehard fans. And it was one of the coolest experiences of my life. And then you go into the actual convention center, they had live podcasts you could watch. They had gameplay for the Uncharted 4 Horde mode. They had other games there. Like, I got to try Resident Evil 7's VR mode at this event, and it was a great way to meet people and feel engaged as a PlayStation fan. And one of the cooler things they did is allow you to collect playing cards if you went to different booths, and you could actually collect a full deck of PlayStation themed playing cards. I think I got up to like 40 or 45 before they ran out, but it was a cool little experience that you could have. And then the merch store was awesome. Basically, where Sony's at right now is that they're on a cliff and they're about to fall off. And it's a good cliff, right? They're in a really solid position. They have great hardware that's lasting a lot longer than the PS4 did. They have the PS5 Pro, which is incredible if you actually get your hands on it and spend the $700. They have great accessories like the DualSense Edge and the Pulse Elite headset. They've got great monitor output support like 4K and 1440p. They've got themes. They've got everything people want. And all we need are just these last few things like PS3 emulation, more fan support, more communication from Sony, and more first-party games. And the best part is, if you look at past PlayStation generations like the PS3 and PS4, all the best games came out in the back half, and that's exactly where we're at right now, the beginning of the back half. So hopefully when I make this video in 1 year from today, I can say, wow, we got all these great announcements, we got a showcase, we got a state of play, we got all this great stuff to look forward to, leading us right into that perfect soft landing of the PS6 generation. But all we can really do now is wait and see. So if I had to rank 2024. I obviously wouldn't rank it the highest in terms of the best years of PlayStation ever, but I think the people who are naysaying super hard and feel like it was the worst year they've ever had, they just don't play games. Because if you actually play video games on your video game console, I just fail to see how you could feel like this was a bad year for gaming. There was great stuff coming out all throughout the year, and I had a ton of fun playing new games, old games, and everything in between. But that's my thoughts. Now I'd love to hear yours down in the comments below. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.